All right, well, we are going to move towards a conversation about what it means to serve on a board of directors, how to dive deeper into those conversations, and how to gain a seat that has influence. What does it take to be a good member? How to manage your time in those conversations, how to choose those boards. This panel is going to be moderated by the University of Montana Business Dean Suzanne Tilleman, and will also include input from Fran Albrecht, President and CEO of the Montana State University Alumni Foundation, Hatton Littman, Leadership Consultant and owner of Surf HL, and Sherry Taylor, President of Logan Health, Chester, and Cut Bank, and a Montana Chamber of Commerce board member. Please welcome our next panelist to the stage.
Hello, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you. I have a wonderful panel joining us today to discuss about becoming engaged with boards and board leadership. To get us started, we're going to do origin stories. So I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to introduce themselves, state their position, and why or how did you get involved with your first board?
Sherry. All right, I guess I get to go first. So I'm Sherry Taylor. I'm the president of Logan Health in Cut Bank in Chester, out on the High Line, for those of you who may not know where that's at. My origin story is very unique in that I never actually ever intended to be a CEO or a president or anything, but ended up with a critical access hospital that was really financially struggling and had passion for my community and hospital. And I just felt like, if I just work hard, dig in, and do it, that's what we need and that's what our community needs. And it soon became very clear to me that there was a miss in such that there wasn't that voice sometimes that was talking about rural healthcare issues and had the passion and drive. And so I clearly started to see that if I don't step forward and I don't start doing it and I don't have a voice for this, it may not be covered and it may not be addressed. And it is so critical for our small communities. And it was huge for business. I saw that on our boards that there was all these business leaders, and I asked them, they own their businesses and stuff, and I said, why are you sitting on a board that takes up your time, you're a business owner and you don't have time? And they said, because it's so important to our economy, rural healthcare. And so then I started to realize that if these business owners and other people were willing to sit and give their time, then I needed to also be willing to step forward and do that. And so I started to engage and understand that I needed to be willing to step forward and really engage at a level and get on boards to really promote the rural healthcare issues. And so I didn't have time. I didn't want to do it. But, I think sometimes I started to be at conferences and other things, speaking out and talking, and people were like, well, why don't you get on board? So I did end up saying, okay, I'll be on the board. A little trick, I used to always get on the governance committee because that's who selects on the executive committee, and so I just made sure that I never got on the executive committee. But it sometimes backfires on you, so just to let you know that doesn't always work. But I think it was passion and desire to see what needs to happen for our communities.
Okay, quick follow-up question then. What was the first board that you felt compelled to kind of start this journey of being on boards, so to have impact?
One of my very first boards was the North Central Montana Healthcare Alliance, which then also led into some of my engagement with the Montana Hospital Association. So then there's just been a little thing, called Medicaid expansion that just did a little bit of time, but that was the real advocacy.
Hey everyone, my name's Hatton Littman. I run my own consulting business. It's called Surf HL. Grab me in the hallway and I'll tell you the story about that sometime. So my first board position actually started, I was under 30. I was a young mom. I had a 2-year-old son and I was pregnant with my second son. And I was living in the city of Denver. And it started out as a coalition of neighbors, retirees, business owners, and young parents like me who said, hang on a second, these public schools in this part of the city aren't working. They're not working for the kids who are going to school in them, and they're not working for the families who want to come to them, but are largely driving their kids across town to other schools. So that coalition just sort of identified the problem and worked for about a year trying to figure out what was going on. And then 10 of us became, well, it couldn't have been 10 of us because you have to have an odd number, but some group of us became the founding board of Northwest Parents for Excellent Schools. And we created a nonprofit doing educational advocacy with about 7 schools in that part of the city of Denver. And we were wildly successful. And like Sherry, it was all started because we felt very passionate about an issue that was facing our families, it was facing our neighborhood, it was facing economic development and home pricing and quality of the neighborhood, and we just wanted to do something about it.
Good afternoon. Great to see you all. I'm Fran Albrecht. I am the president and CEO of the Montana State University Alumni Foundation. Any of you Western Montanans out there, I lived in Missoula for 25 years, and I'm a Great Falls girl by native, grown up there. But with boards, I got to tell you, there were times along the way where I thought, why are they asking me? So I had to get over my own imposter syndrome and say there's got to be a reason. What I'll say when I started was I was hired as executive director of a nonprofit in Missoula called Watson Children's Shelter. It wasn't called that then. It was ready to close, actually. And it still exists today. That was my first board, and that board was so exhausted because they were trying to keep the doors open. So I had to learn how to work for a board and to build a board, a strong board of people who could help me and work in partnership with me to bring that organization to new levels so that we could take care of kids from abuse, neglect, abandonment, and family crisis. After that, so that was on that side. I was then asked to be on the Missoula Chamber Board, but also asked to be on my first for-profit board, where I remember my husband saying, no more boards. And that was when First Interstate approached me to be on their advisory board and then their foundation board. And again, I was in a situation where it was mostly men who had significant success and capacity. And I had to ensure that I had the confidence and find my voice in places where it was great for me to be able to share the perspective of what the community needed from the bank perspective. And I didn't mind a little bit of a paycheck on the side for that little hustle.
Yeah. So people may not know this, but for the ones in the room who do not, when you're on a for-profit board, there is usually some compensation for your service.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, question. How do board members add value? Now, each one of you told a story about how you felt compelled to add value, but you've also worked with many boards and sometimes managed boards. When you think about board members adding value, what are you hoping they will do? When you've served on a board, how have you added value?
I'll jump right in. first of all, you need people who will show up and do the work and set their own personal and even business or political agenda aside. It has to be focused on the mission of the organization, the mission of the business, whatever that is. What I also saw was when I became involved in the community, and for example, part of Leadership Missoula is one example, and then you had to plan the next day. When I said I'll be part of a committee, I showed up. And it also helped me to realize who are the kind of people that I would suggest would be good board members, because they showed up, they followed through. And that's how I was raised and what I just expected. But what I realized is that people were watching, and they said that's the kind of person that we want, who's a collaborator, who will actually show up and follow through, and is not doing this so that she has it on her resume or whatever may be. It was not about self-promotion. It was about a deep commitment to care for whatever I was doing, and I made sure that I had the time to commit so that I could show up.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So boards are just like the adult version of the middle school group project. Show up and do your work. I think what I would add on to what Fran said is you add value by participating in your strength area. That might be technical expertise, like if you are the board's treasurer or you're a legal counsel to the board, but it also might just be what you shine at, what your native genius is. So I'll say oftentimes, like that very first board story, I was the one who wasn't afraid to go down to the city hall and lobby school board members, the mayor, future senators. I was just like, well, these people need to know the problem. And I was good at that, grabbing them in the hallway, building relationships, telling the story, and conveying the issue. So everyone needs to lean hard into what their expertise is in service of the organization. It certainly is great. I didn't realize I was honing that expertise, but it is a great outcome for you personally in your career when you're honing a certain skill and it allows you to shine. But really what you're doing is you're sharing that in service. You're sharing your core strength in service of the mission of that organization. The last thing I'll say is the other way you can add value is not being afraid to have a different perspective at that table, especially when the board could potentially be locked in groupthink. Like, it is important that you disrupt that if you have a really important other perspective to share that might be in everybody's blind spots.
Yeah, I would just add what I feel is really important is when you serve on a board, you come from a different perspective and a different viewpoint, and you need to engage. And I encourage, I've been a lot of times quite young or new and stuff, and if you're going to spend the time to be on the board, engage at the board level and engage in the conversation and ask questions or put perspective forward, because that is the part that you can, the role you can play, is being able to bring that value in your background, your expertise, or your knowledge and understanding, and not being afraid to speak up, because otherwise, I'm sure you have a lot better things to do with 2 or 3 hours of your time, right? So I think it's important to engage and be showing up and actually there and a part of that, and stepping forward when you have something that you feel passionately about.
Thank you very much. As a follow-up question, yes, you must engage, right? You must ask questions. You should break up groupthink. But what if you've never been on a board before, you're brand new on the board, perhaps you're younger than many of the people in the room, or perhaps you're the only woman? Do you have any tips in those situations?
I think if the board has any systems for mentorship of new members, ask for those and ask to be paired up with somebody. If they don't, if that's just not a standard system of how we bring in new board members, then go seek one out. I mean, I think we've heard a lot today about the strength and power of relationships for getting things done. And I think one of my first bits of advice from being young on a board, not really even understanding exactly what the role of the board was, just being mad as hell and wanting to do something about it. But I think one of my lifelong mentors I met through that board. She gave me my first job in nonprofit consulting, and I learned a ton from her. But just sidle up to someone who can help you and can explain things to you on the side. If you've never looked at financial statements, ask, get somebody to explain them to you. I think just finding the relationship is important.
I'll jump onto that. I'll never forget when I received a call from the governor's office, then Governor Bullock's office, asking me if I would be interested in being a candidate for the Montana University System Board of Regents. And I remember thinking to myself, are you sure you have the right number? And one of the things that we, and I hate to say it about women, but I know for myself that we stop ourselves with our own belief systems. And I thought, what would I know about serving on one of the most powerful boards in the state of Montana, governing 16 institutions of higher education? And what I quickly realized was I didn't have to know everything. I needed to ask the questions that would ensure we were talking about the kinds of issues that were at the appropriate level of governance. So I asked a lot of questions and thought a lot about how do I get us up to this? Because what you'll also find on boards is that you'll find people that want to micromanage the leader of the organization, or they want to get into the depth of other areas where that's not your role. So asking those questions. The other thing, to your point, Haddon, when I was on the board and then I was vice chair and chair, again, it was how do I lead to facilitate the best from this board? And then we have a student regent who is always on there. I made it a point to always take that person under my wing to make sure that they were confident enough to ask the questions. I would say, you can call me about anything, like what do you wear, how do you show up, anything, because I wanted them to be able to quickly get past those things that would hold them back so that they could get into the mix of the conversation and be effective.
Yeah, I found it extremely valuable. I was quite young on a lot of the different areas that I served, and leaning into, there was some amazing women in Montana that were the pioneers kind of going before, and kind of leaning in and asking some of the questions and understanding, because it can be awkward and you're not quite sure what to do there. But I really encourage you, find those individuals that you can respect and you know that they have the right knowledge and expertise level, and then really just lean into them and ask them the different questions that you might be not exactly comfortable asking at the board level, but needing to understand in order to fully engage. So there's quite a few more, I will say. In Montana, it felt like there was only 2 others in the whole state, but now there's a little bit more happening, and there's a lot more that you can ask.
So this leads me to a question some of the people in the room are going to feel. Once you get noticed, once you've served well on a board, and then you've been asked to be on another board, and then your name is top of mind, they know you will show up, you will perform, how do you decide, enough, this is where I need to cut my limit? Like, I'm sure you get many more asks than you say yes to. What is your thought process? How do you make that determination?
It's time, and it's, do I feel deeply about this, the mission of the organization, or does that align with me? And then I always look for how can I still help them. So in a couple of organizations that approached me, it was, I can't commit right now, and that would be a disservice to your organization and to myself and my family if I do this. What I can do is sit down with you and do some brainstorming around the kinds of folks you might want to think about, or even share some of my expertise in other areas that might be helpful, which are the reasons why you're asking me to serve and to be somebody that's a resource for you for the future at any time.
Yeah, for sure. It's always time and my ability to do the job well. You know, when I get asked to do something, I want to understand more clearly, whether it's a board member approaching me or an executive director approaching me. Tell me about your board. Tell me about what you're facing in the next couple years. What kind of projects are you working on? What's your committee structure? What do you expect from board members? Because I want to really understand their system before I give my yes. And then I will only give my yes if I think I can show up in my own integrity and do a good job for them. So for me right now, that means 2 boards. One that I'm chairing and one which is a city-county advisory board that it requires a ton of homework, but not a lot of like leadership. So that's my limit. But there was a time when I was doing 2 people's big time jobs and on 4 boards, and that led to burnout. And we all know that story. And once you know, you've learned from it, you're like, oh, no, thank you. I'm not going back down that golden brick road.
I got to jump on that. In one of the past organizations, we actually invited, so once the board figured out that we wanted a person, and they said, I would be interested, I invited them to come and see how the organization worked so that they could actually see a board meeting, so they could decide if they wanted to bail right there. But I think it is important to your point that you get an understanding by going and seeing what's happening so that you understand the dynamics and the reality of what you're choosing to say yes to.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I was smart, and before I had not enough time, I figured that out checking. But my story is a little bit different in that I love and I'm very passionate about things, especially rural healthcare and all of that. So I typically say yes first, and then because there's a lot of really incredible organizations that you believe in the mission. And one thing that I would say, if you don't believe in the mission and the vision of that organization, don't do it. You have to have the passion, and that really drives you. But what I have experienced was time commitments, and really understanding that I want to be an incredible board member, but there was a point where the time just did not permit that to happen, and I wasn't fulfilling what that board needed. And so, sitting down with the executive director and saying, hey, I don't think I can be the board member that you need, and I'm not fulfilling what that is, but let's figure out incredible people that would even be better than me that could serve on that board. And so my experience has been trying to actually get better people than myself to actually fill in as I needed to exit out.
Oh, this is excellent advice. Let's flip the question. So I just asked, you get asked to be on boards, you've been successful, how do you decide, this is where I want to put my time and energy? What if there are people in this room who have not served on a board? They would like to have that opportunity. If you were to give them advice on how to get onto their first board, what advice would you give them? And let's start with Sherry.
All right. Well, I would say engage in conversation and really be involved in areas and come to conferences and connect with people and really share your passion. And I will tell you, as you do that, it will start to happen. And you'll have those opportunities to be able to get connected with those. All of mine has been nonprofit. And really understand, and especially those nonprofits or pieces that you really engage with their mission and vision, just start to be there, show up, be a part of the conferences, do things and speak forward, and be willing to step forward at any moment, and it will happen that you have that opportunity.
Yeah, I absolutely think engaging, especially if you know there's a cause or an issue or an industry that you care a lot about, getting involved in that area. So one way could be if a board opportunity isn't available to you, starting to volunteer with that organization or adjacent organizations. And then as you're starting to engage, tell people out loud, I'm interested in board service. This is something I would like to do for my community or for this issue area, so that they know. I mean, one of the best things people do is when they say our names when opportunities come up for us. Well, let them know that you want that opportunity. So volunteer and tell people what your goal is.
I think they hit it.
All right. Right. Here's a question. We're going to do positive and negative, okay? And if you were considering joining a board, you had talked about really getting to know the commitment, how it's organized, what they're trying to achieve. But let's go maybe to how do you decide if the board that you might join is healthy or not? So what are some signals that it is operating in a positive momentum fashion? Or what are some signals that maybe, especially if it's going to be your first board, that you would want to watch out for?
Okay, I'll go first. I think it would be great, and Fran's suggestion of people going and seeing the board in action. So I really think it would be important to see how does the board operate. It's really important as a board member and to see that there's only one employee that board has, and that is the executive, the president, whoever that is. You do not do anything else. You have nobody else. You're not over anyone else. And if you see that the board gets into micromanagement, I think that can be what's really tough, is that it's at a policy level, it's at a guidance level, and if the board is at down in the weeds operations level, it's an unhealthy board, right? And so possibly that's not a great first board, but even if you go and see a couple of boards, it will be very obvious what is a healthy board. Or if the board members have no idea what was in the packet or didn't read anything, I mean, they're not engaged, right? And so that's probably not going to be a healthy board either.
Yeah, for sure. If folks aren't showing up really asking good, thoughtful questions about what the topic is on the agenda, or the chair or the person leading that committee meeting isn't doing that effectively, those are all red flags for me, because then I just feel like I'm going to get frustrated. I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what our goal or outcome is. I think the other thing that's a flag for me is if it's an organization that its budget is made up partially based on charitable contributions, if the board isn't active in some way in giving themselves or in some type of fundraising, and I realize that's like one of the things we'll talk about and can be icky, but even if the board isn't just like making introductions to people they know to help with the fundraising, then I find that to be a red flag too, because then you probably just got an unsustainable funding model.
Do you think fundraising is icky?
Well, you don't, but some people do. Some people get the ick.
I know. It's relationships. A couple of things. First of all, it's really helpful, and I make sure that I do this on, have this on every board that I'm on, leading, whatever, that there's a board expectations document so that you know what the expectations are. Do you need to contribute? Do you need to help with fundraising, et cetera? And then, most importantly, are there term limits? There are boards that do not have term limits, and those are the most unhealthy boards. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't get on them. You should get on there and say, we need term limits. Also, when you recognize that you've got an organization where the executive director is constantly surrounding themselves with same faces, same people to protect them, and that they're not bringing in nor open to new ideas to help the organization thrive and grow.
These are hot tips. This is great advice. I'm going to follow up on Hatton's comment because we did discuss some things that people ask, and one of them is how does somebody who's pretty new to boards figure out or ask, given there is no board expectation document, what are the expectations around fundraising or philanthropy or those efforts or other hands-on work the board might expect?
I think you've got to ask. And I think that's why, as a new person, remember that you bring a fresh perspective. Those are the kind of things that will help an organization evolve, and which is the same reason why you need a variety of people with different expertise. You also need to look at how diverse is the board? Because if you don't have a diverse board across industry, across gender, a variety of across ages, et cetera, that's not going to create the kind generate the kind of quality discussion that's going to be helpful. So again, having that voice to ask those kind of questions and then continually educate yourself on board service. ChatGPT helps me a lot on a variety of things, but you can dive into a lot of best practices. One of the things that I did on a board that maybe was a little controversial, but there were board members who were behaving badly. And what I mean is that they were really going out of their way and meeting with some key people that they shouldn't have. They were going, not necessarily following the line of command. We brought in an expert who to come and facilitate, to help the board understand and become educated about what best practices are for that industry, and so that they could understand that they were out of line, because they were not going to hear it from me as the chair. But what I knew is if I brought an expert in, it would help us all to learn and elevate that. And I actually did that with a couple of different boards. It's amazing how even if you know the answer, you got to bring an expert in to be able to spoon feed it to people.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of board training at all levels, and I used to work for a public school district, and one of the things the trustees always had to do was board training, and it's essential so that you do understand where the very clear line is between you at an advisory level and the organization at the actual operational level, and that one individual that you actually interface with. Because you just don't want to be mucking around on things that you really have no place mucking around with operationally. It's your job then to just hold the executive director or the general manager or the president accountable for the standards that the board expects.
I think they said it well.
What I'm hearing, right, we heard earlier today that sometimes people, not just women, but people have a hard time discussing finances and money because somehow that's not good and shameful, and it's like telling you how much I weigh or how much I make every year. It's just not permitted. But if they have not shared expectations and there is a concern about what's the philanthropic expectation, ask, right? There is no harm in asking, is this, what's the philanthropic expectation? What is the work expectation? Right. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, so please phone a friend if you'd like. But can you share a very anonymized experience you've had with a board that might have been in crisis, needed a realignment? It sounds like Fran has stepped in and figured out how to bring in external expertise in multiple situations. But is there an example, hypothetical, that you could share with us about a more challenging time on a board?
I'll share that it is not especially a high conflict situation, or it doesn't have to be, but when an organization, I've been on a board where succession planning is part of the work of the board, and there is no more critical moment to really make sure that you are taking care of and shepherding that organization through that process. And I would just say that's a moment to perk up and really pay attention and engage at a level where you are there because you are there to do meaningful, thoughtful, legacy style work to protect the organization. So if any of you get the opportunity to go through succession planning, just making it clear both to the transition committee what the guiding principles of your work are, so you keep those crystal clear to get through the challenge of it, and also being really clear and really supportive to the staff while that succession planning is going on. Because you don't become the staff's boss in that process, but they are going to go through this weird transition of like, wait, that person was my boss, and you guys are in charge of helping get a new boss here, and maybe one or two of us will be on the interview committee, but there's a lot of reassuring that needs to go on in that kind of process. So I would say that's a moment that I've experienced where it called upon me to bring my best, most engaged, most thoughtful self to the work.
On one of the opportunities I had serving on a board, there was some challenging times. And I think it was a concerning time that we had to kind of go through where, from my personal concern, was that the board was at a point felt a little fractured and not necessarily unified. And one of the things that I found that needed to be done is we had to actually engage all of us as a board. And there was, unfortunately, some situations where people aren't speaking up at the board level. And you've heard about the meeting after the meeting, which is extremely unhealthy. But that type of thing was happening. And so there was a process that had to happen where everyone was brought together and everyone was called upon to speak and to give perspective and to really talk about the things that were bothering and challenging in order to get back to that unified mindset. And it was challenging, but it was good in that everyone did come forward and we could get back to those pieces.
And that makes a great point. And I know that Sherry's not talking about groupthink. It's the fact that when a board makes a decision, and even if you are not all in favor, but you have a majority, that is what rules. And so there's also that confidentiality around when you go into executive session to talk about the executive director, for example, and it's, okay, this is what we're going to do, and there's a lot of discussion. You leave and you don't talk about that. So you have to, for the good of the organization, the good of the person, you've got to make sure that you all stand firmly behind the ultimate decision. A couple of things. I've been in some very interesting board situations, and I've had to remind myself I was called to be part of this for some reason at this time. So buck up and sit up and know that you're the right person to be here. Couple of things when I've observed board members, what I called a soliloquy, watch them, and I'd sit there and watch them go on and on and on, and it was so distracting to the rest of the board and the efforts that we were doing. Addressing those things and really setting an expectation and creating an environment where that is clear about that, and facilitating, and that everybody has the opportunity to facilitate, to make sure that I know that Sherry has something great to say and she's brilliant. I'm going to want to make sure that the introverted, those who are going to think about things rather than those who are just going to spew it out, let's make sure that they are heard. And we as board members have the opportunity and the responsibility to do that. The other thing I'll say is these boards often call you to do some things that are very challenging, and they stretch you, and they also sometimes make you consider, wow, what is this going to do for me personally or professionally? That means calling out a favored person. I observed a situation where there was a board member who was micromanaging the CEO. And I will never forget the respect that I had for the other board members who finally stepped in as volunteers and asked that person to step down in order to save the CEO. That took a lot of courage, and being on boards takes courage to ensure that your voice is heard. And oftentimes it's challenging, but you have to look at, is this for the best, for the good of the organization? And those are the board members that will really help an organization to thrive.
All right, thank you so very much. I came away inspired, and what I am hearing is people can become engaged when they care, and that's where they should put their energy, and they should bring their best skills, their best self, and their courage to have incredible impact through boards. I encourage you to talk to everyone here if you're interested in boards, and express that and volunteer. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for leading that conversation, and Fran and Hatton and Sherry. How inspiring. I can't wait to hear what board conversations are probably happening amongst us, because I would love to hear from each of you what boards you're serving on and which ones are good boards or not so good boards. I have to tell you a funny story. When I first joined the Montana Chamber Board about 10 years ago, and I don't know if Todd's in the room, I don't know if he's heard this story before, but when I first showed up with that board, and I know I got asked because I was from Eastern Montana, and I'm a female, and I'm from agriculture, so I show up at the very first meeting at the hotel, cocktail hour, and I know a few people, but not a lot, and I walk into the room, and I'm imposter syndrome, all that, and the first man walks up to me and says, "You must be Todd's wife." Nope, I'm just another board member, but it just cracked me up that was one of the first interactions that I had.